You're listening to the Egbert, Margaret and Stephen podcast. For more stories, you can go to my website at jettabradley.com. Egbert, Margaret and Stephen and the French teacher. Margaret had a new French teacher who'd come straight from France, and she had fallen in love with him. As soon as he walked into the classroom, her heart flew open and 100 starlings flew out. "Bonjour, monsieur," Margaret called out. "Bonjour tout le monde," he said, ignoring Margaret. Margaret leaned forward, smiling so hard and hoping that the French teacher would glance down at her and notice her and smile into her eyes. But the French teacher never even looked at her. Margaret decided that the only way to get her French teacher to fall in love with her was to write him a book of French poetry, because she knew poetry was the way to a French man's soul. "Can I have 3 pieces of your creamy card?" Margaret asked her mum after school. "Okay," Mum said, giving her a meaningful look. "They're on the top drawer of my desk." Egbert was stretched out on his bed listening to music with an enormous pair of earphones on. When Margaret came in, he eyed her crossly. "Can I borrow your calligraphy pen?" Margaret said. "What?" Egbert said. He took off his headphones. "What is it?" he said. He'd been waiting all day to listen to Schubert's No. 9. "Can I borrow your calligraphy pen?" Margaret said. "No," Egbert said. "Please, I'll do anything for you." "Anything," said Margaret. "Fine," said Egbert. He took out his pen and ink from his desk drawer and gave it to her. "What do you want me to do?" said Margaret. "I'll let you know," said Egbert. She went into Stephen's room and said, "Can I use your hot glue gun?" "Ah!" Stephen cried, smashing the Lego Thor he had built. "Look what you did!" "Sorry," Margaret said. "I'll help you rebuild." Stephen shook his head glumly. "No, you'd only make it worse." "Can I borrow your glue gun?" Margaret asked. "Why?" said Stephen. "Can I borrow it or not?" "I suppose so." She went up to her room, cut her creamy card into small pages and glued them together to make a small book. Now she needed a poem, a unique poem, a poem that would touch her teacher's heart. But nothing, not a single idea came into her mind. She glanced out the window at a bird flying past. She wrote, "Bird flying past." She looked around at the paper scattered on the floor and she wrote, "Paper scattered on the floor." She heard creaking underneath her and she wrote, "Creaking, creaking." She felt her toes begin to go numb and she wrote, "Numb toes." She read the poem back to herself. "Bird flying in the sky, paper scattered on the floor, creaking, creaking, numb toes." And then she fell asleep. While Margaret was asleep, a starling flew in through her window and into her dreams. The starling told her that the way to a Frenchman's heart was not through poetry, but through croissants and coffee. Margaret instantly woke up and the starling flew out the window. "That's it," she whispered. She ran downstairs and gave Stephen his hot glue gun back. Stephen frowned. "Why is there a feather in your hair?" Margaret rubbed her head and a tiny soft black feather fell out. She strode into Egbert's bedroom where he was sitting on the floor, cutting out leather to make shoes. Margaret gave the calligraphy pen back to Egbert. "I don't need it anymore." "Doesn't matter," said Egbert. "I still lent it to you, so you still have to do something for me." "That's not fair," said Margaret. "It is fair," said Egbert. "Fine. Since I haven't used your pen, I need you to help me buy a French croissant and coffee." Egbert stopped cutting. "You'll need money," he said. "I've got pocket money." "That's right. You never spend any of it," Egbert said, rolling his eyes. "Come on, Stephen," Margaret called out. "We're going to buy croissants and coffee." "Oh, I love croissants," said Stephen. "They're not for you," said Margaret. "Well, I'm not coming if I'm not getting a croissant." "Fine," said Margaret. She could feel her carefully saved money shriveling to nothing in her pocket. "What friend are you giving it to?" said Egbert. Just a friend from school." Egbert and Stephen stopped walking and stared at Margaret. "She's being suspicious, isn't she, Egbert?" said Stephen. "Yes," said Egbert. "I asked for your help, not your questions," Margaret said. They got the bus at the top of their street and Egbert and Stephen sat together behind Margaret. "She's being weird," said Stephen. Egbert nodded. He had no idea what any of this was about, but he sensed trouble. They rode for 15 minutes until they arrived at Le Café Français. It had more pastries than it was possible to name. Eclairs, croissants, macarons, religieuses, millefeuilles, and there was a lot of coffee too. "Can I help you?" a black-haired, straight-bobbed French waitress called Adeline asked them. "Ask for the best croissant," Margaret said to Egbert, ribbing him with her elbow. Egbert knew a little bit of French, but less than Margaret thought. "Give me the best one," he said, "or I'll haunt you tonight." Adeline flew over the counter and pointed her knife at Egbert. Stephen screamed and Margaret clung onto Egbert's elbow. "All our croissants are the best," shouted Adeline, "and the best eclairs and the best macarons." "What do you want?" said Camille, the second black-haired, straight-bobbed waitress. "Your worst pastry," said Egbert, who was feeling very stressed with a knife still pointed at his chin. The second waitress flew over the counter and pointed her knife at Egbert. "Egbert, please get it right," trembled Margaret, staring at the two knives. A third waitress, Georgine, appeared. She was black-haired, but her straight bob was shorter than the others. "Nasty boy, what is it you are wanting?" "Un croissant," whispered the trembling Egbert. "Un," said Georgine, the second waitress. "No," said Margaret, "deux." She remembered that Stephen wanted a croissant. "Deux," said Camille. "Trois," said Margaret. She couldn't leave Egbert out. "And a coffee." The three black-haired, straight-bobbed waitresses all swiveled and glared at Margaret. "S'il vous plaît," Margaret said, and feeling glad when she could finally walk out of the shop alive. So good," Stephen said, hoeing into his croissant as they rode the bus home. Egbert, sitting next to him, was too busy stuffing his face to say anything at all. "It's useless," Margaret gasped from across the aisle. "The coffee will be cold." Stale coffee was not going to win the heart of her French teacher. Egbert frowned. "Were you taking the coffee to your friend tomorrow?" Margaret was too upset to even answer him. She folded her arms and looked out the window, watching the houses go by. "We shouldn't waste it," said Egbert. "Yeah, you can have it," Margaret said. "How about we give it to Dad?" said Egbert. "But he can't drink coffee," said Stephen. "Exactly," said Egbert, grinning. "We'll tell him it's decaf," Stephen grinned. "He won't drink it without a croissant to go with," said Margaret. Egbert and Stephen stopped eating. If they could get their dad to drink real coffee again, it would be worth giving Dad their croissants. So they stuffed their remaining croissant back in their paper bags. At home, the coffee was all heated up nice and hot when Dad walked through the door. "You've been to the French caf," Dad sniffed, immediately eyeing the leftover croissants on the plate. "We got your decaf," said Margaret. "I'm not supposed to even have decaf," said Dad. "Told you he wouldn't want it," said Egbert, picking up the cup. But Dad snatched it off him and took a sip. "Ah, this is good." He drank the rest in one long gulp. "Dad," said Stephen. "It's okay, Stephen, I can handle it." The next morning, Dad was still at the kitchen table. He laughed when he saw Egbert, Margaret and Stephen. "Boy, that was some decaf. I knew I shouldn't have had it. I've been up all night." "What did you do?" asked Margaret. "I finally finished fixing that car." Egbert, Margaret and Stephen ran to the garage. The car that Dad had been fixing for the last 10 years looked exactly the same as it had the day before. But the wheels on their normal everyday car had been replaced with very large wheels. Stephen grew pale. "What?" he whispered. Their old car was now a high-riser. "I am not going to school in that," said Margaret. "We will walk," said Egbert firmly. "We'd better leave now." When they arrived at school, Margaret watched Monsieur France walk across the car park. "Oh, man," she muttered. "What?" said Egbert. She shook her head. She'd forgotten she wouldn't have a French lesson for another whole week. By the time she gave Monsieur France the croissant, it would be really, really stale, and a stale croissant would not make him fall in love with her. Egbert followed her gaze, realizing slowly what this had all been about. "You know, I have Monsieur France today." Margaret turned to Egbert, her eyes wide. "You have Monsieur France?" "Yes," said Egbert. "Can you give the croissant to him?" Egbert smiled. "Why, I think Margaret's in love with the new French teacher." Margaret closed her eyes, wanting the ground to swallow her up. "Please, Egbert." Egbert took the croissant and grinned. He went into class and gave the paper bag to Monsieur France. "My sister bought it for you." Monsieur France took one look at the croissant and devoured it. "Mon Dieu, that was the best croissant I have tasted since I came to this country," said Monsieur France. "Where did you get it from?" he said to Egbert. So that afternoon, Margaret and Egbert took their French teacher to Le Café Français. When Adeline saw Monsieur France, she said, nice man you have here. Oh, he's just my teacher, said Margaret. Oh, oui. I think he might be more than just a teacher. Oh, no, I am a French teacher. I came just to teach French. Then you should teach her French love, said Adeline. Okay, said the French teacher. I will teach her French love. He got on his knees and he said to Adeline, you are the most beautiful woman I've seen in all my time in Australia. Will you come for coffee avec moi, s'il vous plaît? Je t'aime. What are you doing? What are you saying? Said Adeline, and she took the French baguette from the bread basket and she knocked him on the head with it, and he fell on the floor, unconscious. This is what we do in France when the men are silly, said Adeline. Here, let me show you again. No, said Margaret. No, what did you do to him? Did you kill him? Kill him? His head is so thick he wouldn't die if I knocked him with a wrecking ball. No, he is just a little bit asleep. I tell you what, we will wake him up. We will put a little bit of strong French coffee in a cup and put the smell of the coffee under his nose. Margaret held the cup under her French teacher's nose, and slowly the French teacher opened his eyes and looked up at Margaret and said, I am in love. With me? Said Margaret. No, I am in love with this woman here. She has so much strength. She was able to knock me out with just a little baguette. I will knock you out again, said Adeline, if you don't stop speaking such rubbish. This time, the French teacher went down on 2 knees and he clasped his hands together and he said, Please, s'il vous plaît, come with me avec moi au restaurant. You are showing this young girl how terrible Frenchmen are. Stand up on your own 2 feet and ask me properly. So the French teacher got up on his feet. He said, Will you come with me to the park and have a beautiful picnic with a little champagne? Margaret gasped in shock and began to cry. Her teacher, she realized, would never have eyes for her. Oh la la, cried Adeline. Look what you have done. You made the little girl cry. Egbert winced. I'm not little, and I don't want to be here any more, said Margaret, storming out of the cafe. Egbert hailed the bus, and they squeezed between the commuters. Just so you know, I thought they were patronizing too, Egbert said, but Margaret didn't say a word. She hung onto the pole, staring straight ahead. At home, she went up to her bedroom, sat at her desk, and wrote, The bird is banished. The bird will be strung up, and feathers will be pulled from his breast. The bird will fall into the deepest hell, where love cannot be returned. Once she had finished her poem, she signed it, Margaret. She went downstairs, found an envelope and wrote, Monsieur France on the front. The next day at school, she went straight to Monsieur France's classroom and handed the poem to him. Don't you ever come to my classroom again, Monsieur France. And she took out her baguette from her bag and she beat him with it. Egbert, Margaret and Stephen watched as Monsieur France ran down the hallway, out the front door, and was never seen at the school again. That's my Margaret, said Stephen. Egbert knew exactly what he wanted Margaret to do for him. What? Said Margaret. You'll write a poem for Amelia and you'll send it to her. My heart has just been broken and you want me to fix your love life, said Margaret. Egbert broke out laughing. Come on, he was your teacher. Fine, said Margaret. She was so upset that she didn't listen to a thing her English teacher said. Instead, she wrote the worst poem she could think of. Then there was a knock on the classroom door. Miss Otter, her dad said. Dad? Said Margaret. Potter, said Miss Potter. Miss Potter, apologies, said Dad. I need to take Margaret out of class. Margaret followed her dad out of the school to where he'd parked the high-riser, which he'd now painted purple. There's a bird stuck in the boot. It won't let me get it out. Why didn't you get Egbert to help, said Margaret. He tried. The bird didn't like him. Margaret leaned down into the boot and picked up the tiny starling and held it close. The bird trembled, shook its wings, and tiny soft black feathers floated around her as it flew up into the sky, free again. I knew that starling wanted you, said Dad. Hop in, I'll give you a ride home. Margaret dropped the terrible poem into Amelia's mailbox next door. Amelia read the poem 2 minutes later. She came racing round to Egbert's house, flashing the poem at Egbert. "It says here that you love me from the tips of my toes up to my hairy nostrils," said Amelia. "What?" said Egbert. "Yes, and it also says you love me from the bottom of the hem of my dress up to the nits living in my eyebrows." "Excuse me?" said Egbert. "It also says that you love me from the chewing gum stuck to my shoe right up to the dandruff that falls on my shoulders." "It doesn't," said Egbert. "I will never be your girlfriend," said Amelia, and she threw the poem at Egbert. "Wait," said Egbert. Amelia stopped and glared at him. "The truth is, I didn't write it," Egbert said. "You didn't write it?" "No, I asked Margaret to write because I thought she was pretty good at poetry, but this is bad. This is really bad." "Well, if you didn't write it, then that's okay," said Amelia. She took out her baguette and hit him across the side of the head. "That's for getting someone else to write your poetry," said Amelia. "Never do it again." "I won't," said Egbert. And they went outside to play basketball. The next time Margaret had French, a new French teacher came in. She had a black bobbed haircut that was slightly too short, and she carried a fresh bag of croissants with her. And she said, "Nasty children, what do you want to learn?" And that was the end of that. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed it, share it on social, leave a positive comment on my website or Instagram, or email me. I'd love to hear from you.